We're going to be taking a look at what is Halloween all about? Why? Because each year the question comes up for many to participate or not. Let's get started. Did you know that what Xerox is to photocopying and Kleenex is to facial tissues? That's what Halloween is to October 31st. It's the name you know. It doesn't represent everything, but for some reason, we use it to do just that. For most people, Halloween is an annual event or holiday celebrated on October 31st or beginning on that evening. What you do on that day depends primarily on which group's practices you choose to follow, or possibly mix with others, if at all. If you're going to look at what we know as Halloween from a historical perspective, we have to begin with something that's called Samhain or Samhain. It looks like Sam Hain, but it's actually a Gaelic or Irish term. Starting at sundown on October 31st and continuing to the next sunset, a group of people called the Druids, that's Druids if you're writing it down, and Wiccans, Wiccans. Wiccans are those who practice different forms of witchcraft. They have a meal to celebrate the end of the harvest season. For them, it's actually a New Year's Eve, with New Year's Day being November 1st. Again, it's Samhain, a festival of the dead. That's what it's all about. For well over 2,000 years, the Celtic people, and that's spelled Celtic. If you're into basketball and you know about the Boston Celtics, the term is actually Celtic, but there's a reason behind why they pronounce it the way they do, which we're not going to deal with today. But the Celtic people and their druids, which were like their religious leaders and philosophers and magicians and the sort, they celebrated November 1 as their new year, a day for new beginnings. It was also the beginning of the dark half of the year, as they saw less and less sunlight. Now, the Celts and the Druids, they were nature-focused polytheists. A polytheist is a person that believes in multiple deities or multiple gods. We as believers in Yahweh through Yeshua are monotheists. We believe in one God only. The Druids believed in nature. They were nature worshipers. Again, they were worshiping the creation rather than the creator. It's really found highlighted in the book of Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 26. Rather than honor God, they honored what he made, and then they elevated those things in their minds above him. They believed in nature, including creatures, that there was a magic or power in them that they could influence or control or get supernatural knowledge. In modern times, the holiday is meant to be shared with those that have passed on. To make sure you didn't miss that, Samhain is designed to be shared. A meal is to be shared with those who have passed on, died, deceased, gone. You set a place at the table for those in that spiritual plane. Then you provide an offering for them with every serving of the meal. And then you share the meal with dead folks. Not. The holiday, as I said, is meant to be shared with those who've passed on as you share these different things with them, but it's not something that we're supposed to be practicing as believers. Now, even though they happen at similar times and have similar themes, this thing called Samhain and Halloween, they're not the same holiday. Halloween is an abbreviation for something called All Hallows Eve, and they're both celebrated on or about October 31st. But if you really look at it, you'll find out there are three things plus one that are going on in this same time frame. The way I like to share it with people is that please remember, there are only 365 days in a year. If you want to have 800 different things going on, there's going to be some date sharing. Just remember what you're sharing and what you're not. Samhain is to share and celebrate the dead. And it has a religious focus, just not a godly religious focus. Then there's All Hallows Eve, which is known as Halloween to most of us. And that is a Roman Catholic feast day or feast 3-day period. And it remembers the dead saints and martyrs and has a religious focus. They believe in praying for the martyrs and the dead. And then there is the famous Day of the Dead, which is more like Samhain, but celebrated by Latin people worldwide, especially those who are Catholic. And then who is our plus one, or what is our plus one? It's the actual Halloween that most of us in America are familiar with. Somewhat family-focused event, mainly filled with costumes and candy. Modern Samhain observances don't involve human or animal sacrifices as it may be claimed. And I found no evidence to confirm or deny this, with the exception of an article in the USA Today written back in October of 2012. They found the remains of someone who looked as though they had been part, not the best part, of one of those celebrations. Unlike All Hallows Eve, Halloween, and the Day of the Dead, Samhain rituals are held in private rather than in public, especially if they're doing some of the things that are alleged as in the image. Now, some background. Samhain coincides with the end of the growing season, that is, the end of the harvest season. Vegetation stops, leaves on trees change from a healthy green to vibrant colors as actually they're dying out. And so to some, they see this as death in the air, which you have to remember. We're talking about people who started things and did not have a 20th or 21st century mindset. They are rural people. They don't have a lot of information, no science information, may not have the Bible to explain to them what's going on. So this may help explain the reason why in those ancient times, it was believed that there was a veil or barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead, that it became thinnest at this time and that the dead could cross over. And this would facilitate contacting them and communicating with them. Whoo, boy. This is something people have believed for centuries. So you're not just going to go out and tell someone that's not true. I mean, you can say that, but if they or their ancestors have been promoting that, it's going to be hard just to say that. Now, especially in the land now known as Ireland and surrounding areas is where a lot of this grew out of. They're known as as I mentioned earlier, the Celtic people. And like I said, in case you're wondering about the basketball team Celtics, there's a reason why they pronounce theirs a little differently. But as all this relates to modern day Halloween celebrations, Samhain is actually the pattern upon which it is based. That is true, minus the intentional calling or welcoming of the dead, we hope. Here are some components of celebrating Samhain. They're going to go from acceptable to ungodly pretty quick. Take a nature walk, observing the colors, aromas, sounds, and other sensations of the season. This seems kind of harmless until you are told, but any impressions that you get while you're doing this, journal that down. You might be careful where the source of that sensation is coming from. You can set up a Samhain altar. Wait, what? Includes skulls, skeletons, ghosts, harvest foods, mulled cider, and wine. Not harmless at all. Ha! Believers, avoid this. The Samhain ceremony. This starts the 3-day celebration with the meal I talked about earlier. This meal is to give honor to the earth for all it has given. This sidesteps Yahweh, who causes things to grow from the earth. Make an ancestor's altar. Honor the deceased by putting photos and mementos on a table, things that they liked in life. It's okay to remember those who passed on, but building an altar to them, not so much. And then guide the spirits to the spirit world. Wait, what? Aren't they there already? They don't know where they're going? Yes, they actually already are where they're going. Avoid these kinds of things like COVID-19, 20, and 21. They also suggest have a seance, have bonfire magic, and divinatory guidance, like spirit guides. No, 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 no. These are not things we should be practicing. Again, this is contrary to what believers in Yahweh through Yeshua, his son, should participate in, let alone practice. If someone says, hey, let me read your palm, close your hand and pull it back. Let me read these tea leaves. Walk away. When people make these seemingly innocent requests of you, what they're really asking for is, I need an open door so that a spirit can come in. What in the world am I talking about? For those of us who are baby boomers and maybe some behind, they remember a character by the name of Count Dracula. The thing about Count Dracula in the original movies was that he could come to your window, he could even knock on the window, but he couldn't come in unless you opened the door or the window. When you made an access, and these things are access points that can allow yourself to be influenced improperly to in a lesser or greater degree by an unclean spirit. You're saying, sure, go ahead. Don't say, sure, go ahead. In ancient times, they had bonfires, and a bonfire in and of itself is not really an evil thing. I know that some people say it comes from the word bone fire because it was built on bones, but there may have been some who did take it to that extreme. But in general, a bonfire is a big fire. But what they did, they would actually build a large bonfire, and then they would take the embers, that is little pieces of that after the celebration was over that night, and they would put it into a carved turnip because turnips were plenteous then. In America, they were, when they brought this tradition over, they began to use pumpkins because they were more plenteous than turnips. But basically, it was just their way of carrying the embers home. Well, why are you taking them home? Because they wanted to put them in their fireplace to start a fire to keep them safe from evil spirits. Fire, keep evil spirits away. See, they didn't have a Bible. They didn't have understanding, because that definitely won't keep one away. Or their ancestors who might be walking along. They don't want them coming along. These people would wear costumes in case they encountered an evil spirit on the way home or after they got home. And hopefully the costume would confuse the spirit so that they wouldn't bother them. Yeah, again, not a 21st century mindset. They're thinking that I'm going to do something that they won't know who I am. Please understand this. In the real world that we live in, that is, and I mean from that spiritual perspective that Yahweh has given us, they know. The Bible has this to say about these kinds of things. Leviticus 19:31 reads, "Don't turn to those who are mediums, nor the wizards. Don't seek them out to be defiled by them. I'm Yahweh, your Elohim, or God." And then Deuteronomy 18:9-14 tells us, when you enter the land Yahweh, your Elohim, is giving you, be very careful not to imitate the detestable customs of the nations living there. For example, never sacrifice your son or daughter as a burnt offering. Do not let your people practice fortune telling or use sorcery or interpret omens or engage in witchcraft or cast spells or function as mediums or psychics or call forth the spirits of the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable. Second time you hear that word, detestable, to Yahweh. It is because the other nations have done these detestable things that Yahweh, your Elohim, will drive them out ahead of you. But you must be blameless before Yahweh, your Elohim. The nations you are about to displace consult sorcerers and fortune tellers, but Yahweh, your Elohim, forbids you to do such things. Don't turn, imitate, or practice what caused Yahweh to evict several nations out of Canaan. Am I saying the modern observance and celebration of Halloween is guilty of these things? If by Halloween one's referring to celebrations on October 31st, then for some, that's a yes. They are doing that. That's their practice on this day. But how did we get here, and why is there so much confusion about it? The Roman Catholic Church, as part of the Roman Empire, conquered the Celtic, or I'll just say Irish, territories, and over 400 years they ruled over them. And many Celtic practices merged with Roman traditions. Fast forward this to the year AD 609, May 13, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome in honor of all the Christian martyrs and the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day. This was established in what was known as the Western Church of the Roman Catholic system. The Pantheon, in case you're unfamiliar with, is the honor the Roman renamed Greek gods. comes from two words, pan, meaning all, and theon or theos, all the gods. That's what they were honoring. And so they gave this place, this temple, to the Roman Catholic Church, and they said, okay, we're just going to rename it and repurpose it. Some things work out easy that way. Then 228 years later, another pope comes along, Pope Gregory III, and I always wonder, where did they get these names from, right? He expanded the festival to include all saints as well as all martyrs and moved it to November 1st, AD 837. Now, why do I take time to say this? I'm taking time to say this because what they're saying is, we see what these people are doing. We're going to try and repurpose what they're doing. And we're still looking at honoring the dead. We believe, Roman Catholics, not me, Roman Catholics believe you pray for the dead. I'll never forget when my grandfather passed away, a couple of months had gone by, and we get this package in the mail. We open the package, and there's this nicely framed document that says the saints or the fathers or nuns or whomever are praying for your dearly deceased, and had my grandfather's name. We're like, what? Why are you praying for him? We know where he is. He knows where he is. He doesn't need that. I found out then that one of our relatives was a devout Roman Catholic. Did not know that beforehand. But we said, we're not going to hang this up because we don't subscribe to that. Then in AD 1000, few hundred, another century or so past, the Church of Rome made November 2nd All Souls Day, a day to honor the rest of the dead. You see, we got the saints, that is the ones that they made saints, and the martyrs on November 1st, and then the rest of the people the next day. Again, we think they were trying to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead with a related but church-sanctioned holiday. Yeah. But it was celebrated very similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires. They had parades. They dressed up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. Just thought, food for thought. Praying for the dead is not a practice for believers. Now, do you see a recurring theme here? Honoring how to honor the dead? Now, I do not believe a memorial for a person who has passed on is a wrong thing to do, unless as part of that memorial, you're trying to include them in it. Now, that's called calling forth the dead. And for believers, that's a no-no. All Saints Day was originally called All Hallow Mass, like Christmas, the Mass of Christ. All Hallow Mass, hallow means holy or saint, is the Mass for the saints. That's exactly what it was. And the night before All Saints Day or All Hallow Mass was All Hallows Eve or evening, and you shorten it and you get Halloween. That's where the name actually comes from. So if someone asks you, is Halloween a pagan celebration? No. Although it has some elements that are highly questionable and definitely non-biblical. But I've got to tell you about one more thing that you've been seeing a lot if you've been at Target, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, a few other places. Even they might even start showing up at Walmart. It's Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead. It's a 2-day holiday that reunites the living and the dead. No, it doesn't, but that's what they're celebrating. Families create ofrendas, which are offerings to honor their departed family members that have passed in the previous year. On November 1st, they honor the children who have passed. On November 2nd, they honor the adults who have passed. They make these great ornate calaveras, which is Spanish for a skull, and they're made often of made as edible or just decorative skulls from either sugar, which makes them edible, or clay, which makes them inedible. But please don't give me a skull. I would not appreciate that. That's not a good thing. They also, that is, those who celebrate the Day of the Dead, and this is mainly throughout Latin America, they create altars and decorate them with bright yellow marigold flowers, photos of the departed, and their favorite foods and drinks of the one that's being honored, who has departed. The offerings are believed to encourage visits from the land of the dead, as departed souls hear their prayers, smell the food, and want to join in. No, I don't want you coming to my house. That is not what we're to do. Remember where I read earlier, we are specifically, as believers, covenant people of Yahweh, we are specifically told, don't do anything that calls on the dead. Don't do it. This is not a practice for believers yet. Many who celebrate the Day of the Dead, they are Catholic. I remember some years back when they were going to have a celebration like that in our children's school. We told them, you let them know that you aren't participating in that. And if they have any question or problem with that, or if you have any concern, let us know. You'll be home for that day, because we don't want you participating in that. And I'm going to give you the reason why in just a moment. Because like Eddie Murphy came to America, so did Halloween. Halloween comes to America in the mid-1800s. Guess who it came with? Irish immigrants, descendants of the Celtic people. They came to the United States and they brought their Halloween, if you will, traditions with them, including dressing up in costumes, asking neighbors for food or money, and pulling pranks in the evening on October 31st. Americans started doing the same thing, which eventually turned into what we now know as trick or treating. We've gotten so much into the Halloween thing that last year, now I want you to, if you're looking at the screen, because you have a screen, you see a number there. If you can't read that number, I'm going to say it for you. If you can't see the screen because you're audio only, I'm going to tell you what that number is. That number is $10,100,000,000 was spent to celebrate Halloween in 2021. And they are estimating for 2022, $10,600,000,000, $500,000 more this year. Yeah. People are just all over trying to celebrate this. And for believers, they keep asking this question. You know, Halloween, as we know it today, is one of our nation's or country's oldest holidays. It wasn't always celebrated here in the United States because it was outlawed in certain parts of the country at one time. But it has become an important and at times fun part of our culture. The question is, among believers, should we celebrate, participate, and promote Halloween? For the Day of the Dead, it's very much like Samhain. That should be a pretty clear no for believers. I mean, no one should do it, but our jurisdiction is among those who are covenant people of the Most High. Modern day Halloween, according to former Satanists, witches, and such, they call it the Devil's Day. As a matter of fact, the guy who is the head of the Church of Satan said, I am so glad Christians allow their children to participate in one of our holidays. Like, wow, that's a scary thing to have someone say. But should we or should we not participate? Some believers say we can redeem it and use it as an evangelistic tool. Others say we're doing trunk or treat and asking those who dress up, at least from our churches, not to do so as anything scary or ghoulish. But you do know a costume is still a costume, right? I'm not going to say whether you or your children should or should not participate in Halloween activities. That is a decision. As Paul said to one group of people, you need to be persuaded in your own mind before the Father. But I will offer this consideration. The reason that the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites were judged and kicked out of Canaan is because they were practicing these things. Practicing those things that Yahweh 3 times said, this is detestable. I need you to understand something. If anyone tells you all this spooky stuff is bunk or false, there's nothing to it, that is not true. The reason the Father tells us to stay away and avoid those kinds of things is because they are true. That's why these nations got kicked out of Canaan. They were doing these things. And if you need a biblical reference, check up when King Saul could not get a word from Yahweh. He couldn't talk to his number one priest and friend Samuel because Samuel had passed. So what did he do? He went to a woman who had a familiar spirit to call him up. Guess what? He showed up. Really wasn't good for King Saul. If you want to know the rest of the story, check that out in scripture. I want to get you into the word of God so you can see, read, and understand for yourself what things he's telling us we should or should not do. If you lived in the land where those people did those detestable things, there is a high risk you might pick up some of those practices. I mean, I know you're super spiritual. You got an S on your chest and you're a super saint and a lot of things don't move you, but you might be like a man named Lot who lived in Sodom, the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. There was a high risk factor that he and his family could pick up some practices from those really confused people, men wanting to know other men in a sexual way. They were really perverted, lewd, crude, and bizarre would be one way I would phrase it. I think his daughters sadly did get tainted by that. If you want to know more about that, Genesis chapter 19, and you'll learn something about the beginning of two nations that come as a result of Lot and his daughters. It's also believed that the man who had the legion of demons, in your Bible, it will say he was in the Gadarenes or the Gerasenes. He was most likely a descendant of a group named the Girgashites, one of those 7 that got kicked out. Might explain why he had such an overwhelming amount of uncleanness in his life by way of spirits. You need to determine the risk factor for yourself and your children when it comes to participating in Halloween events and activities. Sad part is Yahweh has given us a 7-day end of harvest celebration. It's called Sukkot. We just ended that. It's Thanksgiving, family reunion, and homecoming all in one and lasts for a whole week. It's possible, just possible, if we practice more of what he instructed, we might become the light-bearing influencers he intends us to be to light the way. Think about it. Shalom.